Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is BattleCry Milestone 9. And this week, our primary objectives were to complete out the tutorial part 2 inside the game itself, as well as to bring back the arena, which was a proof of concept scene that we had originally put together early in the development for purposes of testing out some of the battle mechanics. So we'll take a look at the tutorial, how that works, how we wired that up, and we'll be taking a look at the arena, which is really sort of a copy of the game scene, with some of the pieces pulled out that don't really apply because we're not saving anything, we're not writing anything back to the server. So any of the functionality that relied on that got pulled out. But essentially it gives the player the ability to run around, take territory, and test out their BattleCry mechanic, which ultimately was the impetus behind an arena. Then we started attacking some of the backlog. Basically, there was a change to some of the new graphics on whether or not the buttons are disabled or not. I did a first rev on that by turning them black. We'll see whether or not the users resonate with that as a button I can't click, or they just click on it and nothing happens, or I need to go back and do something a little bit more obvious. The reason why it's a little bit more challenging after the graphics overhaul is we're now using layered graphics, so the ability to disable the button only affects one layer of those graphics, leaving the other layers fully intact. So there may need to be some additional work that needs to be done to really send that home, but this we felt was a pretty good first rev. This is another large part of Milestone 9. Again, some of the feedback from previous milestones was let's focus on the big mechanic of the game, which is the battle cry, the ability for not only the player to hear it, but to visualize what's happening with the battle cry, see how its parts are being broken up and addressing or transforming into various unit creations. So this is an introduced step to showing that player that battle cry when it's played. Some interesting things came about. Learned a little bit about how Unity manages memory. The visualization of the battle cry was extremely memory intensive. We're basically processing 24,000 samples, which are float, which are 4 bytes basically. It's 64 bits involved in that float, and with 24,000 of them, and then various iterations of segments of 8,000 to show the basically the FFT transformations, and to visualize those, and then to manage the interim buffering side of that as we're mutating from a audio file to an FFT transform, and then trying to visualize that. So that just really sent the memory through the roof, and apparently Unity works from a fat memory or fat heap standpoint. If you allocate 100 megabytes of memory, and even if it frees it up, it'll maintain that high watermark and just use the memory that you've allocated. So whatever the highest point is, then that becomes its playground. But the flaw is it doesn't do a really great job at cleaning up objects that you've destroyed, you no longer have reference to. It seemed to have consumed that memory and consumed that memory and consumed that memory. The standard .NET garbage collector doesn't really do a lot with the Unity objects, the monobehavior objects, but there's another particular resource manager that through working out we were able to free all that stuff up. So that was a fairly daunting task to try to track that down, because essentially after 5, 6, 8 of the replays of the battle cry without switching scenes, which cleared it all up, it consumed all the memory on the device, and then it just caused a crash. So we're now in a better space where we're utilizing that and then freeing it up when we don't need it anymore. Friendless audio in icon last action, so this was another big one that's been sort of pending and hanging out there, is on the friends and the high scores. Is they have an audio icon. When you click it, it digs into the system and goes, what was their latest, greatest battle cry? And the thoughts and feelings behind this is that if I'm following someone as a friend or I'm tracking the high score guys, I want to be able to play their battle cries and inspect them and listen to them and why are they winning and I'm not winning, and it gives you the ability to watch it. And from a friend's perspective, always having a new battle cry that you can call in that kind of gives you that connection, very Facebooky, that I'm not stalking them, but keeping up with my friends and listening to their latest battle cries, and it creates that connection. So that's been dangling out there for a while. That just needed to get done. Cleared up some other low-hanging fruits that were just annoying. Deleting accounts were showing up on the friends and high score list. They shouldn't be doing that. The hero selector shows the count was just wrong. So when you're doing the combat, if I had a hero and I picked it for one combat, then I went to the next one, it still showed it as selected. Or if I selected only one, it would show two selected. It was a mess under there. So that got some cleanup. So now we're properly counting and managing heroes and buffs in combats when you do your various combat. And the last one was just something I've been meaning to kind of play with and tweak with, trying to get some user feedback. It varies from phone to phone, so it's kind of a moving, opinionated target. But the button press, the click was kind of harsh. So I used the equalizer that's built into Unity to kind of soften the click a little bit so that it's not as harsh. And again, sort of a fuzzy logic thing that wasn't a hard fix. Just did some adjustment and tweaking to what I felt sounded good, and then I suppose we'll let the players decide whether or not it needs further tweaking. So that's Milestone 9 in a nutshell. We're going to follow the same format. We're going to record and show these features off as I record from my iPhone onto my Android, just to show multiple devices, and then we'll dig into each one of these verticals from the iPhone and then take a look at the code. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this week. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 9, and we're going to take a look at BattleCry. On this week's docket, we are looking at tutorial part 2. This is Baxter BattleX going into the actual game itself and helping players navigate the game and understand better what to do. We're going to introduce the arena this week, basically a testing area where players can go in and do sort of an unlimited combat, unlimited battle cry, just to sort of play around and experiment. We've added some new graphics in the last milestone, which made it difficult to make the distinction between disabled and enabled buttons, so we took a first stab at it this week, and we'll see how that goes. We've upgraded the audio wave playback so that the playback is now visual for players. We've upgraded the friends list so the friend list now plays the most recent battle cry for that player on the friends and high score lists. Deleted accounts don't show up in those lists. The hero selector and buff selector count during combat when you're applying to combat counts properly, and the button press was too loud, so we used the equalizer to adjust that a little bit. So first and foremost, we're going to go through the tutorial end to end so that you can kind of see that. So I'm just going to uncheck tutorial here and get Baxter started. So this is the same tutorial that we saw last week, minor changes, and I'll point them out when we get to it. So bear with me as I reach around the screen to scream my battle cry. Battle cry raw. Battle cry raw. And as you're seeing, the new visual pop-up that shows there and slowly squidgies off screen. We'll dig into that a little bit more. It jumped by the open games because I didn't have any open games available. Baxter's a little smarter this year, or this milestone. This is the new arena, so that's the change from last week's tutorial, as he's now featuring the arenas of play to practice. And we'll blow through the rest of these since we kind of saw it last week. And that's the good luck message. Alright, so then Baxter continues if we go into a game. I don't know which one's a better game to go into, but we'll go ahead and go through it. Now, because screen real estate is very limited here, Baxter is a 100% story mode. Here I'm not having him interact with any of the icons because it was becoming too cumbersome, and moving the parts and pieces around was covering up too much. So at this point, it's basically story mode. He's bringing the barbarian hero into the game and talking about the arena and showing the icons. I upgraded all of these stony looking icons. I forget the color, but they all pop up now, and so that's what he's talking about there. And then basically is going into this shield, which is the map shield. This shield is the recruits and heroes shield, purchase buff shield, and the shield for battle histories. That is the touch these buffs type of pointer. Swipe map to navigate. Select the hex to see what's in it. Select your own hex to buff it. Select a neighboring hex to attack or reinforce. And then essentially just tells you need to manage in resources to buy stuff. So we'll see if this gets people a little bit more acclimated to the way combat works. Roar! All right, we'll head back. We'll take a look a little bit at some of these audios. So this is giving a player the ability to not only see the original audio, but also the FFT transform that is associating with the infantry, cavalry, and the archery. So with that, there may be enough mechanics in place for the player to start to deduce how to manipulate their battle cry in such a way to maximize their unit retention. On the friends list, you're always going to be picking up the latest and greatest battle cry for that friend, and same thing on high scores. Whatever the last battle cry was that they initiated in a combat, you will hear that thing. So let's take a quick look at the arena, which is this button here. Basically letting you know that this is a testing ground, nothing lasts forever here. And you'll notice that we're missing some buttons down here in this area. You can't play the battle cry right off of this simply because there's no way to store one. You can go to the map. If I do combat, I can attack. If I attack, I can't add heroes and buffs because there's no way to track and maintain it. So this is really just a way to play with your battle cry. I'm testing my battle cry. I'm testing my battle cry. Then you can do your battles and combats. One of the other big significant changes is that you're not stopped there, so you can continue to attack from here and here and just keep playing and fighting and battling and essentially testing out various battle cries within the map. Every time you play, it generates a new map, so this gives you the ability to, you know, just play a variety of different diverse field types and decide how movement works and play in that area. But ultimately, it's just a testing ground. Okay, so we've seen basically the audio wave progression playback. We've seen the arena, we've seen the tutorial. Let's see here. You'll notice here there's a difference in these buttons. The button's black, I can't click on. This one I can. So that's the
progression of active, inactive buttons. Subtle, but still noticeable. So we'll see whether or not that pans out, or we need to go and do a little extra work this week. Other than that, deleted accounts don't show up on the high score, and you can't challenge them anymore. And we've upgraded the challenge capability for these guys, so they do the same thing. Blah! Oh, I already have a pending challenge. So we'll come over here to my pending challenge. Yeah, I've already got one down here with Xander. But you can see here it's a little more noticeable. This is an active button. This one, these are all inactive, waiting for other people, so I can click on that one. The hero sector, we'll dig into that when we switch over the iPhone so we can see the code pieces. And I'm not sure if it's noticeable, but the button click is a little softer. Alright, that is Milestone 9. Let's go ahead and dig into the parts and pieces. Thank you. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 9 BattleCry. We are going to take a look at issue 3068, which is tutorial part 2. I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I'm going to go up in settings, and I'm going to uncheck that the tutorial is complete to kickstart Baxter Battle Axe. So similar to last week, he goes through this progression. I've already reached my maximum. He's smart enough to realize that, and he just carries on. Goes to the open. I think we saw we didn't have any open. Again, he's smart enough to carry on. And we've added the focus to the arena to allow players to know how to get to the arena and how to play the various audio samples and playback, and getting to the friends list and the high score list, and essentially that's it. So the next piece occurs in the game itself. This is as good a game as any. So he pops up, and again, just due to real estate, it was way too cumbersome with pop-ups and layers to try to get the player to be interactive with the tutorial. I may come back at this when I've got more time to really beat it to death, but at this point I've opted for the story mode version of the tutorial, where it just sort of highlights various things and points out some of the key areas. Now again, part of the affordances from Milestone 8 was using shield button to try to encourage the user to press those things. Generally speaking, it's just walking them through what you do. You swipe, you select a source and then select a destination from a neighboring hex. Again, the icons popping up around the affordances has helped considerably to do that, and then just briefly talks about resources that the player will need to maintain. So that's tutorial part 2, short and sweet. Again, the goal here is to get the player in, get them oriented to the screen so it's not so overwhelming, and get them exploring it, and at least they have a general idea of what to do. Alright, thank you. We'll move on to the next one. Let's take a look at the code. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 9 BattleCry. We are looking at issue 3068, tutorial part 2. So from last week, we extended Baxter Battle Axe with additional animations. So he has his Battle Hello 1 through step 12. That's basically these animated sequences here. So essentially we have this path here, and then in the battle game itself you have this path. Both are very linear except for the going off screen piece that was needed to facilitate some of the on-screen touching. Now again, as we stated, trying to achieve that, Baxter ended up spending more time off screen than he did on screen, and so we ended up just opting for the story mode. Like very much anything else, all the animations were created, given about a 1 second transition point from A to B, and we created a variety of Boolean-based parameters to control the animation.
Now, let's see here. Make this a little bit easier to look at. So as we're looking at these parts and pieces, like we saw last week, if the boolean is true, the transition effects occurs. We're not writing defaults, and essentially all of the animation clips do not load. So that's all the setup within the Unity IDE itself. The tutorial manager, which is the code base, handles the progression portion of that, generally through its next step, but it carries a series of booleans for mapping as well. And we'll go to play next step, and basically this is our pivot point as to whether or not we are in the main screen type of scene or we're in the battle scene. So at this point we're in the battle tutorial, and then again everything seems to progress along these lines. So as I play next step, where are we going, and what are we setting, and it just literally goes through this gate of if and else's. This one's a little bit simpler. We didn't have any real custom pieces except for maybe here, where here we're trying not to allow them to touch the map. But and I expanded. There's potentially 3 or 4 more opportunities to do that. We expanded the reset state to include basically initializing all of these. We weren't really doing any push, so I didn't expand that piece, but that's the crux of it. It is simply just controlling the animator and setting these fields to true or not field, and that's just taking the animator and setting those booleans, and that's about as complicated as it is as it moves them through the story mode for this week. So again, not a lot going on there. The critical pieces is the next step piece, where we're basically establishing the let me get down to it real quick, where we're basically setting this no map to make sure that they can't touch the map, and basically disabling some of the buttons and features, and then essentially driving the next step itself on the animation by flipping the boolean and making him go. And the little triangle button on him is tied to this method itself directly, and that's how the story mode progresses with the button, very similar to how last week worked. So not a lot of code behind that to get that animation working. The bulk of the wire up is here inside the IDE, using the animator and the animation clips, and basically deciding where he goes from place to place. So that's the bulk of it, and that's all there is to it as far as the code's concerned. Thank you. That is issue 3068.
Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 9 for BattleCry. We're looking at issue 3069, the Arena. Go ahead and get logged in. Now the Arena is this button up here in the right hand corner with a skull that says Arena on it. So we'll jump in there. It quickly lets the player know that, hey, this is just a practice area. Do it! Attack! Do it! Attack! So we have all of the same mechanics for combat that we do in the standard game scene. We have the ability to exit and manage our map and look at all of our stuff, and basically explore various hexes and see what's going on. We get a new map every time we play. There's our enemy, so we have an opportunity to practice victory if we want to jump around there that far and get them. We don't run out of movement, so we can keep attacking, and we can keep, reinforcing if we need to. All of that is fully available and functional for us to play with, and it never uses up the moves of the hex. So again, while I don't get the heroes and buffs, things that would require me to do saves and store state, I get the bulk of the mechanics. I get to be able to move around the map. I get to do my battle cry. I get to practice moving those parts and pieces around and fighting. So essentially that's the arena, and it looks a lot like the main combat system minus some of the extra goodies. So that is issue 3069. Let's take a look in the code and see how that's put together.
Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 9 with BattleCry. We are looking at issue 3069. So the arena is itself a standalone scene, very much copied from the game scene. I can see opportunities a little bit further down the line, put a little bit more energy into this, where maybe there's a computer player and the arena is where you're playing a computer, playing turn by turn, and we can reinstitute this functionality where you get your heroes and essentially you just play against the computer. Building an AI capable of playing a player and doing the turn by turn that way, not doable in a week. So this is sort of our give the player the ability to get in, practice test their battle cry, maneuvering around the map, and get some of those mechanics under their belt. So essentially the critical way that this is done for us is, again, I duplicated the game scene, and then I ticked on is arena mode, right? So in arena, so this one little checkbox here is what is driving whether or not visibility is seen and functionality is seen. So if we take a look at the code, here's one here where we're managing the visibility of buttons that I don't want to be visible in the arena mode. Now, why this is somewhat important is as I continue forward through the arena mode, as this reaches what I would consider a natural progression to a computer player version of the game, I can just literally either duplicate the game scene or pass into that game scene that you're in arena mode, and without having to have two scenes. So that's going to be an area of optimization. I wasn't really sure what all parts and pieces I needed to do with code versus what I needed to do in the editor. So I could see this being a player pref passed in as, am I in arena mode or am I in a player versus player mode? But essentially in the code, all I'm doing is stopping you from saving the game, making sure we're not doing any writes back to the database, to the server. There's no persistence in this game. Now, ultimately, if we had a computer player, there would be, right? I would save this game back and forth. I should be able to leave it whenever I want to leave it and then come back and take my turn. So that feels like that's the natural progression of this. But for now, we just wanted a sandbox area for a player to be able to get into and play around with their battle cry, move the map around in an area that wasn't involving another player, keeping it safe, and the ability to attack other areas and play around with, how a battle cry summons infantry, cavalry, and archers to the point where the player is more comfortable to get out and play a human player. But again, I do see this being a road of progression towards going in and playing versus a computer before you get into a PvP environment. But essentially all we're doing is just carving out portions of the code that should not occur in arena mode. We're turning off visibility on features that should not exist in arena mode because we're not persisting this down to the server. And there's not a huge lot of touch points. Anywhere you see us making a call out to the API, we're wrapping that in an arena mode tick and deciding that that's not going or should not run in the arena mode. And again, for this, just on the off chance that there was some hard tweaking that needed to be done at the IDE level, this was split off into 2 scenes, but it was just a duplicate of the game scene. So there is zero difference between these other than the tick right now. But again, it's all about a force multiplier. If I get all the way to the end of the natural progression of this and there's really no reason for an arena scene, then it just becomes a parameter pass into the game scene, and we gain a little more efficiency. But always being right now a one-man show on this, looking for force multipliers. Sometimes it's easier just to select an item and remove it from the scene than to try to manage with code. But my first inclination is to manage with code to give me the flexibility to centralize all this logic in a single set of scripts, which is what we're doing right now. So ultimately, that's the arena mode. It's just a constrained version of the gameplay, and that gives the player the ability to experiment with their BattleCry, conquer a map, even win the map if they go and conquer the opposing castle, and just sort of get to know the game in a safe environment. Okay, thank you, and that is issue 3069. We're on Milestone 9 for BattleCry. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is BattleCry Milestone 9. We're going to skip a little bit ahead if you're following the issue list, and we're going to jump into issue 3103, which is the audio wave progression when playing back the BattleCry. So let's log in here and take a look at what we're doing, and then we'll dive into the code and see how we're doing it. So essentially, anywhere you see an audio icon, you should see our new progression box pop up. And what you're seeing at the top, and I'll go ahead and play it again, is the raw audio file as recorded by the player. And then from left to right is the FFT transformation of that audio from the various 8,000 samples, denoting infantry, cavalry, and archers based on the processing of that audio file. So that's sort of giving the player a bird's eye view into the mechanic and how it's broken apart, at least visually, to see what drives a larger value, and that's more apparent when you go into a game and perform combat, because then you get to also see the various, and let's go ahead and do it. Blah, blah, ah. Blah, blah, ah. And you can see the individual numbers associated with infantry and cavalry and archery, giving the player something that they can begin to affect. Let this combat go through. Now we've got a little bit of form over function here, as far as where and how that BattleCry plays and drifts off into the sunset. They don't always follow the same path. That may be something to push back. The diehards, I think, are going to want to see every part and piece of it. But right now we're playing where we want something that looks a little bit more dynamic. I'm banking on the fact that the bulk of the players are going to get a wow factor out of being able to see it at all, but they're not going to dig in and try to do the visual analysis to figure out what part is what. So let's see if we've got a bad guy one here. And we do. So now, as part of that mechanic, as I select enemy territories that have been attacked, if there's audio, in this case there isn't, it'll automatically go ahead and play and build up the balloon box for me so that I can see what happened. I can just generally seeing and looking at that, it's pretty clear that there was quite a few archers in that original combat. So let's take a look at the history, and looks like there was 554 archers, so absolutely. Let's take a look at it again.
You will meet your end.
Unfortunately for me, I do have a hard time seeing some of these colors.
You will meet
from an aesthetic standpoint, and I rely on my wife for this, those being over top of white instead of over top of black, which made it easier for me to see, was more aesthetically pleasing. So
you will
perhaps
meet
user
your
feedback
end.
will drive something a little bit more meaningful as to what that should look like or play as. And again, introduce Perfect Master, so we're introducing it this week, and we'll dig in and look for ways to optimize it as we go forward. But ultimately, the goal was to be able to visualize the BattleCry and then see mechanically what it's doing behind the scenes. And it's definitely giving a richness to the game. As I'm playing a friend of mine in the game, being able to click and hear his BattleCry is eliciting and evoking the response out of me that I'm hoping to get out of my players, is the fact that voice on the other side, particularly if it's someone I know, is making it a more engaging game. And what I'm finding is if it's someone I don't know, as there are testers from school playing this and I'm not familiar with the voice, I'm intrigued to want to play more to get to know that voice. So early onset is that it's at least inching towards its original goal of being a more provocative mechanic for the players and engaging them more into the game. So I couldn't be more pleased with where it's at right now. All right, that is issue 3103. Let's take a look at the code and see how it's put together. Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is BattleCry, Milestone 9. We're looking at issue 3103, basically the audio wave progression when playing a BattleCry. So as far as components go, this is the prefab that is storing the image component that's going to restore the output of the waveform, and then we have each one of the smaller waveform, which is storing the FFT version, so they're also image components. And then we've got our icons here to basically let them know what those waveforms, those FFT waveforms, are generating for, text timer, and then there's of course a title. So essentially it's a basic object. It's got a script on it that what is the recording, what are my waveform components, counter, where's my text timer, what's the title, and then some seed values, what's the speed and time left and speed at which we're going to count it, and what's the incremental speed of moving the object off screen. So what we'll do is we'll back into this script and let's take a look at how we're implementing it. So everywhere there is a icon to play, whether it's in the game board itself, whether it's on the set active page, there's going to be this type of method. Right? It may vary from screen to screen just on where I want to position it ever so often. But essentially what it's doing is it's instantiating the BattleCry cloud object. It's putting the canvas as its parent. It's turning it on. The default behavior of the prefab would be false. It's positioning it on the screen relative to the button or object that instantiated it, just to position it around the screen in various places. We're pulling out the BattleCry cloud script. We're setting its text, and then we're starting it by passing in the clip, which is the audio clip that's being recorded. So anywhere there's a recording, it grabs that recording data, and then it's going to pass it into this to instantiate this object. And we've seen processing the audio and all that on many other screens before. So in the BattleCry, there's a couple of things I want to talk about besides how we're doing it. So this is the recording, the audio clip. This is breaking it up into its 8,000 segments. This is just references to all the stuff in the object. I flirted with the possibility of outputting the actual result of each one of the FFTs, 500 something archers, blah, blah, blah. And that may be something I come back to. Before I put, 150% into it, let's inch showing off this balloon mechanic and see if that's too invasive, not invasive enough, but does it work as a way to show off the mechanic in a way that's meaningful and useful. And these are just helper methods and parameters and variables for animating the thing up into the sky. So without too much ado, let's talk about the onDestroy, because I'm questioning as to whether or not this is a bug in Unity. So when I first built this, I didn't have these pieces,
and then after doing my memory profile and realized, my gosh, I was actually exceeding the memory of my iPhone and crashing the app if I pushed a bunch of these and spawned a bunch of these balloons. It's amazing how much memory this is taking. Just the sheer memory and processing around the FFT calculations, having to do it 3 times, storing arrays of 8,000 multiple times over, and 24,000. There's just a lot around this recording. So this being sort of the global variables, which are these, I nulled them out to destroy any references to them prior to the mono behavior object getting destroyed. And I noticed garbage collection never came in and cleaned it up. So I started doing some researching, and I saw some speculation on the web talking about how Unity becomes this fat heap that if you hit a high watermark, it'll clear things beneath it, but it'll keep that watermark at that level and just use what's in between it. And I'm like, okay. So at first I wasn't too worried until I realized that every time I created one of these, the memory went up. It never stayed stagnant. I waited a minute or more after the object had destroyed itself. And the way that this is working on start, I'll jump down to the start. Yeah, here we go. It destroys itself in 6 seconds. So these only live for 6 seconds. So a minute after 6 seconds of destruction, and all the memory required to make this thing work was still sitting in the heap. And so if I did another one, it just created a whole bunch more memory and a whole bunch more memory. And then by the time I did 10 or so of these, boom, it would crash. And I'm like, wow. So I did what I'm loath to do, which is force garbage collection. And still, nothing. Did not free it up 1 iota. And I'm like, well, okay. So, and then more research, I realized that the mono behaviors are not managed by the mono objects, the .NET objects. So garbage collection doesn't touch these things. Ultimately, this little thing was my savior, which was the unload the unused assets. Why Unity holds this stuff in memory for instantiated prefabs after I have destroyed them, I can't quite wrap my head around why they would want to keep that. Or the only thing I can think of is because I'm using audio clips, and those audio clips are tied to an audio source, that it never truly loses every single reference. And because there's even just one lingering reference out there, it's keeping it in memory. I can't quite wrap my head around the decision-making process. But this little bad boy right here, it almost destroyed the entire concept of being able to show this, because there was just way too much memory consumption around this process. Because what I'm essentially doing is going through and creating, another 24,000. I already have the recorded samples of at least 24,000 from the recording, getting that, making a copy of it, creating these for the FFT transfer, and creating these for my float values for being able to render everything, and then going through all of my rigmarole on being able to render out what I needed to see. So ultimately, this process, so this is the standard process that we see in combat process recording. We've seen it almost at every single milestone. So starting the BattleCry, it assigns the passed-in recording to the recording reference. It processes the recording. It says I've got 3 seconds to get through this, because I know it's a 3-second recording. Stopping the BattleCry essentially just cleans it up, but I'm never going to reuse this. This is sort of just carryover code. Clearing the sprite, again, never going to use that. This is my helper method for filling carrots. So this is my rendering of the FFTs. What's the sound data? Where am I putting it? And what color do I want to use it? And essentially, it's because it's 8,000 instead of 24,000. I'm creating a much smaller by a third texture to work with, but essentially I iterate over the values. The FFT are much smaller values by a factor of 10, so you'll notice that where I'm doing 100, another one I'm doing 10,000, so it's really a factor of 100. I make sure that it's not too big, and it can actually render that line on this texture. Set up my block for that width, which is essentially the the height with a one-liner, and then I'm filling it with the line color, whatever the color is that's passed in. And as long as the size is not 0, I'm going to paint that block of pixels onto my texture, and then rinse and repeat. And then this becomes my track line as I'm tracking across time. I apply the changes to the texture, and then I output them to my waveform sprite. And render BattleCry, same thing, except it's coming directly off of my recording. So essentially it's going to, this is the movement of turning it white. We saw it up there. This is actually pulling the recording data and putting it to my audio data file, dumping it out into my audio data array, and then processing the audio data array similar to as we saw up there, filling each line as it's calculated. Here you'll notice that the actual audio data only needs to be amplified by 100 rather than 10,000 to get it to be viewable from a human standpoint. And then it paints it and rinses and repeats until we've gotten through all of the samples. This is my track line, again over time. So as it's playing, you're seeing that little line go across. I apply those changes to the textures, output it to my waveform sprite, and here I'm actually managing my timer down to 2 seconds and outputting it, and up here is where I'm counting down my time. I don't do that in this one. I just do it in my main render, because if you look at my update, I'm rendering and then I'm calling my EFT 3 times for each one of the individual component pieces that I need to worry about. Then this is all about floating the piece up, and then this is all the FFT core class for processing the FFT algorithm and outputting into my array. So again, not rocket science as far as what needs to happen, but it just wasn't freeing up the memory without a call to this. This came with the same hazard cones as calling the garbage collection collect. So essentially I'm just doing it on destroy. It frees up all the memory, went through the whole memory profile, so it does a really good job at doing that. But this is just a aha moment, particularly if I'm instantiating quite a few prefabs, that without this I may not be able to unload the data even if those prefabs get destroyed. So I'm thinking of another game I'd written, Wormhole Sweeper, where I was shooting prefabs, fireballs, lasers, deep into space, and they were being destroyed after so many times because they're just a shot, right, waiting to fire off a collision event, and then they self-destroy themselves. But were those things just sitting on the heap, accumulating over time? So that was a little bit of a gotcha. Other than that, that's essentially the whole thing in a nutshell. It's self-contained into its own object. Once I assign the recording to it and tell it to start, it goes about its merry business, updating and going across time and playing those things so that you can see what the BattleCry is. So now we've got the ability to visualize the BattleCry while recording. We've got the ability to visualize the BattleCry after recording. And then even now we're visualizing how the fast Fourier transformation FFT processing has affected each one of the segments. And then those are getting output to the various windows. So that's task 3103, audio output progression. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz. This is Milestone 9 BattleCry. We're going to take a look at a small group of issues, or a group of small issues, depending on your point of view. We're going to look at issue 3107, which is a minor graphical change the way buttons are represented for enabled disabled. After the last graphics overhaul, it was a little difficult to determine which buttons you can click on, which buttons you could not click on. So this is a first attempt stab at trying to resolve that issue. We'll be taking a look at the friend list and high score list audio icon buttons. Those buttons should play a player's most recent combat battle cry, and we'll make sure that it's doing that. We are also not showing deleted accounts. That'll be difficult to show in this demonstration, but when we look at the code, you'll see how it's being filtered out. And you should not be able to challenge yourself. That we can show in this demonstration. And that'll be issue 2992. The friends list issue number is 2991. The other issues that we're going to look at is 2994, which is the hero and buff selector in combat. At the bottom level, the bottom row, it wasn't counting properly, so it's confusing to the user as to whether or not it was properly counting how many heroes and buffs I had available for that combat. So we'll take a look at that and see that that's being properly initialized. And the final issue is 3104, which is the level of harshness of the button press audio, a little clicking noise you hear there. We use the Unity equalizer to soften that click a little bit, so hopefully it's not nearly as obtruse. So let's go ahead and take a look at these. So starting with issue 3107, it's easier to look at here in the pending list. As you can see, these top 5 buttons are much darker than the bottom button, and as I click the bottom button, it matches these others becoming inactive so that I can't keep clicking it, and when I X out it turns back to active. So that is essentially the distinction between inactive and active buttons. The background is turned black. We'll determine through user testing whether or not that is a strong enough affordance between these two modes of the button to indicate to the user that one is clickable and one is not clickable. So again, that is issue 3107. Issue 2991, the friends list audio icon. So let's take a look at that. Okay, so it looks like Wrath of Khan is in fact playing here today. At the beginning of our video for this afternoon, we noted that Wrath of Khan had a howl for their battle cry in this particular friends list. So between then and here, he must have added this blood-curdling scream. To further that, you'll hear that as well.
Something new.
So when I do a test on combat, I'll make that very distinct, and we'll come back in here and you'll see that that is my latest combat. But more importantly, you'll note that I am unable to pick on my challenge icon to the right there. It is black because that is me, and I should not be able to challenge myself. It is impossible for me to show you what's not in this list, so we'll take a look at the code and see how that's getting filtered out. So that is issues 2991, friends list audio icon, and 2992, deleted accounts, visible and friendable in the high scores list. They're no longer there, and you can no longer challenge yourself. So we'll come back to the audio icon after I work on the combat piece. Let's go back into active and take a look at the hero selector and combat selector. Let's see if I've got a good game that I can use to play with. Maybe let's try this one. It's got a couple of things that we can move around. These may be inactive. We might be able to. Let's go out and look at another one here. Here's a good one. No, just kidding. We'll give it one more look and then I'll change over to the other user. Alright, let's log in as someone that I've been playing some games with. So we'll go ahead and log out of this guy. Log in as Xander. Looks like there's a handful of opportunities here. Let's see what we've got. We've got a dwarf and a knight. Okay, and we've got, let's get ourselves a flaming arrow. Alright, can I attack? Excellent. So we're going to attack here. I apparently have used both my heroes already, but I do have a flaming arrow. So I'm going to use that flaming arrow for this combat. This is the latest BattleCry. This is the latest BattleCry. Alright, so let's click on this guy. And when I go in here to do combat again, I should have no heroes, and it's 0 of 1, and I should have no buffs, and it's 0 of 3. So I'm going to back out of that, and I'm going to spend some more of my money, and I'm going to add a flaming arrow, and I'm going to add a flying mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. And I'm going to add a flaming arrow. And I'm going to add a flaming mouse. 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 And I'm going to add And I'm going to add an elf. I've never had elves before. So now I'm going to attack from here to here. And it's going to my elf. I'm 0 of 1 selected. I'm now 1 of 1 selected. That looks right. And I have flaming arrows and flying mounts. I'm 1 and 2 of 3 selected. That looks right. So let's do combat. This is a completely different BattleCry. This is a completely different BattleCry. And let's do the battle. Alright, winning all over the place. Let's see if I've got any room here. I've already used that guy. I haven't used that guy. It's going to attack. I now have no heroes again, and I have no buffs again. So it appears that it is counting appropriately. So let's back out. And let's go to the high score list. Let's find me.
Something new. Something shiny. Something new. Something shiny. This is a completely different BattleCry.
There we go. I'm not Hearthstone anymore. That's the problem with logging out and logging into someone else. You forget who you are. So as you can see,
This is a completely different BattleCry.
that was my latest BattleCry, and I guess when I was in Hearthstone,
Something new. Something
that
shiny.
was Hearthstone's latest BattleCry. So these actions and icons, both for friends and high scores, are now playing the latest BattleCry associated with combat, and that was issue 2991. And we looked at 2994, the hero selector, and the button press being too loud is 3104. I will have to leave that to your judgment. So that finishes up the Milestone screencast for this week, and let's take a look at what little bit of code we can look at for these last 4 issues. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evan Schwartz, and this is Milestone 9 with BattleCry. No, I don't understand it. And we're going to take a look at a bundle of issues. They're very small issues, so we're going to group these together. So issue 3107, which is the graphics change to buttons. I've got it queued up here. Essentially what we're doing on these buttons is we're setting the disabled color to black. And it was whatever the default off gray was, so I went through and touched all of the various buttons to make the press color black as well as the disabled button black, so that when you press you get a notable change. So we'll see if that's enough. Just to speak to the problem is I have these layered images beneath the button here, and so at this level is the circle, which is the shield, and then this is the shouting white guy. So these are all layered up to the button, which is just the smaller circle, which is this thing here, right? And that gets turned black, but none of these change colors, which makes it a little less obvious that it's in a different state. So hopefully the black will stand out enough to be enough affordance for the user. So that's ultimately what we're going for, and that's issue 3107. There's no real code behind it. That's just all in the markup, but it was identified as a problem for users when I showed it to them last week. So I just wanted to make a point to put that back into play. And let me put this back before I move on to the next thing. I do this to myself all the time. I'll queue something up and then not set it back, and that ends up nailing me. Okay, the next issue is the Friends List audio icon. So again, everything that was wired up in the list previously for the Friends panel, it was still there. There was nothing new I had to do from the markup perspective. It was sort of already queued to run and play this deal. So this icon here, let me get a little bit closer. This button, the BattleCry button, basically has a wired up click event that's done through the loader screen. So none of this stuff is wired up in the markup. Right? So we'll take a look at how we're wiring those up. And just put everything back. All right. So flipping over here to the code in the set data item, and this is the load and set. So I'll just show it real quick. So since we spoke about it here, load friends, and what we're doing is we're going through each one of the filtered refresh items, and then we're wiring up the buttons. So here's the play BattleCry button, and it's calling play BattleCry, and it plays this. This is the actual method that's wired to. Here's my button press, but here's the crux of it. So a few milestones back, we created this play filtered cry, which allows me to pass in a filter, right, and then an ID. Now, 9 times out of 10, this is a game ID, but in this case, I'm passing in the player ID in the latest, and that is going to call ultimately a pass through the web service. The web service takes that ID and that filter and passes it in. So it's loading into the filter through game filter and ID through game ID, but in this case it's the player ID. Right? So if I see filters latest, I know to treat the game ID as a player ID. So I'm looking for that player ID in either the aggressor or the challenger ID in my query. And particularly what I'm looking for is battle cries that have an action of attack. Right? That tells me that there's an actual battle cry associated with it. There's an audio file. This is just an efficiency. Trying to run a query against a blob, such as what the battle cry is stored into, even just to check for is null, grind SQL Server to a halt. So this allows me to parse into my XML and go, hey, if it's an attack, I know that there's a battle cry associated with it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been able to attack it. So that allows this to be quite speedy. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm just selecting the top one, and I'm ordering by my updated on. When was the most recent time it was updated in descending order, and it bubbles up my most recent battle cry to the top. So that's wasn't a lot of work there on the SQL Server to get that done. Just added another filter list. And again, which is why I really like this architecture. It's a huge force multiplier for a one-man show. It allows me to just pass everything from client to what I call edge development. I work on the client side, then I work down the SQL side. Everything kind of passes seamlessly through the middle, and it makes it really easy. So this was just a simple query trying to get the data I wanted popped up to the individual item. So when the data set comes back and it's a record of 1, it goes to my handler, and the handler unwraps it, turns off my spinner, and then processes audio, passing it to it, and then goes through the rigmarole of converting the UU encoded into a byte array, blah, blah, blah. We've seen this. Puts that into a recording. I take that recording, I pass that into my new Show BattleCry cloud, pass the recording, put it wherever the action button is where I would like that thing to pop up, and then it plays it. So that's pretty simple. Let's see, delete accounts visible. So let's take a look at that. That's in, I think that's in here as well. So we're going to say not get cries, not get games, get players. Yeah. So in the get players, I added this, right? So these are the exact same queries that were there before for high score and getting friends in the SQL. So I'm just, where player ID does not equal deleted, and that'll keep them out of there until the nightly event comes and cleans them out of the database. So that literally was the entirety of the code to make sure that we're not seeing deleted, because they're not even coming up in the query list. Now, as far as the high score load, as we tickle through the whole plate, if the player ID is this, I make the action button not interactable. So this stops me from being able to challenge myself. And that was the addition to the load, so not a lot there. So again, that's we're looking at issues 3017. That's the making the disabled of the buttons black. Friendless audio icon playing the latest, we just saw that, and that's issue 2991. Not showing deleted accounts and not being able to challenge myself, that's 2992. So let's take a look at the selector. So this is where you're selecting buffs and you're selecting heroes, and the crux of it was just I wasn't initializing the text object, and if there wasn't any, right, I wasn't resetting the text object on subsequent loads. So we're now doing both of those things. We're initializing it, and then if for some reason there was nothing, so it doesn't come in here, and because my gonculator is right here, when I actually set this selector, it actually fires the selected event, which manages that count. It basically calls this check buffs, which manages the counter text. But if there isn't any, if I don't have any, it never calls that, therefore it never manages it, which is why I needed the second one on the follow. So that's really how the hero selector and buff selector, those are pretty minor. And as far as the harshness of the button click, let's get that loaded up. We were way up here on sound effects, and I brought it down to a -1. Played around with a little bit, had a couple of people listen to it besides myself, and that seemed like a pretty good sweet spot compared to where my background and my ambient was. That seemed to be pretty good. It was just like right below the master volume. So ultimately, that's issues 3107, 2991, 2992, 2994, and 3104, and that's the enable disabled button look and feel, friendless audio icons playing the latest action, not showing deleted accounts in high scores and friends list, and not being able to challenge yourself in the high score list. And the hero selector and buff selector during combat, showing appropriate numberage and managing the active and activate those items button properly. And then the clicky noise from the press button is not nearly as harsh. So that wraps up Milestone 9. We are looking at our gold standard release candidate. I'm sure there's still a ton of testing and tweaking and knickknacks. I've got about, well, let's be a little more specific. How many do I have here? Yeah, I've got about 20 items that I'm lingering in my backlog. I cleared out a few. They're all sort of important. These are the ones that are worth really kind of investigating, that I think either are bugs that need to be addressed. I've got quite a few bugs in there, or just got mentioned enough times that it's worth addressing. Not enough time left on the clock here for this project to meet the final gold standard release, but post-graduation, definitely going to pick up these issues and run them through the process and get them cleaned up. And I'm sure that as it gets tested more and more, one of the key things we're going to be doing post-graduation is running the whole game through another graphics scrub. So I think one of the key things, not necessarily outlined, that we will be doing is this pending and open concept, that when you create a new game, you're challenging someone or you're challenging a random player, and it immediately puts you into a game that's active and pending. And we basically boil it down to, here's active games that you're playing, and all a pending game is someone who hasn't accepted to take their turn yet, and then allow the stale game event that if a move hasn't been made in so many days, it just cleans it out. So we will get rid of these two tabs, and it'll be active games, completed games, and the ability to create a new game, and maybe we don't need a whole tab around that. And that'll dramatically simplify this process and get players into the game a lot faster. Just unfortunately, due to the direction shift that I think that would take, there's just no way to get that in place, tested, and ready for delivery in the next 7 days. So, but that's definitely one that's going to take place. And again, there's going to be a whole rescrub of the graphics with someone with a keener eye than myself, adding some UX design onto this. But I think this more than meets the proof of concept for a pitch game, for sure. Um, Not the least of which is because my investors and backers are very excited about the game. Um, and as you can see, they're actually still playing it and playing against one another. So their excitement level around the game has gotten me very excited around the game. And I'm eager to try to get this to the next level, both visually and functionally. There's an entire security layer that still needs to be addressed. Even though I'm over a secure socket layer and I've got the channel encrypted, there's no security coming out of my mobile app talking to my web services. So, a simple sniffing tool would be able to look at what I'm sending to my services. My services don't really do any kind of high-level validation at this point. That would need to be put into place just to avoid someone from cheating the game from the back end and feeding the API calls directly. And there's plenty of ways to approach that, but that entire layer would have to be added to the API calls, which was principally why everything went through a single API class file. I touch just this one thing, and I can wrap that security layer around it and do, mutexes, timers, encryption algorithms that hide the way I'm sending this data. There's a variety of ways and approaches I can take to minimize the opportunity for someone to reach my API service layer directly and just shove data into the database. So other than that, I'm very excited. We're in a really good shape as far as playability. I'm getting a lot of good reception. We're about to head into usability week. So we'll take what right now is guts and feelings and stuff and try to quantify that into something a little more measurable and get some feedback so that we've got some direction on how to take this pitch game and turn it into a production game and get it to market. So that's going to be the next step post-graduation. I appreciate your attention along this journey. It's been a lot of learning, a lot of really stretching my skill set to get to this point, and I think it's a really good vector to the final production volume of this game in the app stores, both on the Android and in the Apple Store. So I've really enjoyed putting this product together. I think this is a fun game, and I think it's going to be very successful. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to your feedback. Thank you.